Have you ever wondered why the Russian army is so drained and struggling on the battlefield in Ukraine? Well, reports show that there have been incredible losses, which involve an average of almost 1,000 soldiers being killed in a day. Truly, the Russian military has faced significant challenges that hindered its effectiveness. The invasion was met with fierce resistance from Ukrainian forces, who were better equipped and more motivated than anticipated. Let's dive into the problems the Russian army is really facing. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel to get more military videos. The Russian army, which was expected to easily crush Ukraine, was forced to fight a protracted and exhausting battle. Deep-seated problems with the Russian military, including inadequate coordination, outdated weaponry, and logistical shortcomings, have come to light during this conflict. Over time, these issues have gotten worse, severely depleting Russian forces' morale and resources. In addition to these difficulties, the Russian army is soon going to have a manpower shortage that might severely impair its ability to conduct operations. Russia is having difficulty keeping its military force together due to high fatalities and a declining recruiting pool. Manpower crisis. Russia's military policy has been primarily dependent on recruitment and citizen mobilization since the start of the war in Ukraine. During the first mobilization waves, a large number of young men were taken from their civilian lives and careers and recruited into the army. The effect on society has been significant. Fearing the draft, a large number of young professionals have left Russia in search of safety in nations that would keep them out of the fighting.
Hundreds of thousands escaping the fighting in Ukraine. But they're not Ukrainians. Instead, Russians fleeing the draft at home by flooding the border into Georgia. One of them, Alexei, takes us to the shelter he now calls home after driving 7 days from Moscow to Georgia's capital, Tbilisi.
This exodus has had a huge influence not only on the military, but also on Russia's future potential, as some of its greatest brains have left the country. The strain on families and communities has been enormous, with countless households disturbed as fathers, brothers, and sons were asked to serve, frequently leaving a path of economic and emotional anguish. The Russian military has lost a stunning number of casualties. According to reports from Western intelligence agencies and defense specialists, 1,000 Russian troops were killed or injured on average each day in May. This severe loss, fueled by continuous attacks on well-fortified Ukrainian positions, has had a high toll. These data, when compared to prior conflicts, emphasize the gravity of the issue. For example, the daily casualty rate greatly outnumbers that of many previous conflicts, highlighting the current conflict's intensity and destructive nature. The total number of Russian casualties since the invasion began is now estimated to be more than 500,000, which includes those dead, injured, and missing. Such losses are unsustainable in the long run, raising major concerns about the Russian military's operational sustainability. The earliest mobilization attempts resulted in a high number of new recruits for the military, but at a significant social cost. Many draftees were unprepared for the reality of modern combat. The unexpected rush of recruits, many of whom had no training, left a force unprepared to deal with the complicated and violent combat scenarios they encountered. This deficiency has further worsened the high mortality rates by introducing untrained soldiers into the conflict. Furthermore, recurrent waves of conscription have depleted the labor market, displacing critical people from a variety of industries and further weakening the Russian economy. Casualty rates have had a significant impact on the Russian military's capability. The loss of experienced soldiers has been very harmful. These individuals are difficult to replace, and their absence from the battlefield has reduced the effectiveness of Russian combat operations. The large number of wounded soldiers also creates a logistical problem. The military medical services are pushed thin, striving to keep up with the sheer volume of casualties. This circumstance has resulted in a backlog in treatment and rehabilitation, limiting the capacity to return soldiers to the front lines. The impact of these casualties is both numerical and psychological. The steady flow of bad news from the front lines, the huge death toll, and the obvious agony of returning wounded soldiers have demoralized both the Russian people and the military. The myth of a speedy and conclusive victory has long faded, replaced by a bleak reality of protracted and terrible warfare. This has resulted in growing dissatisfaction and disappointment among troops and their families, many of whom believe they have been misled about the nature and pace of the conflict. Despite these significant losses, Russia has maintained its military strength through active recruitment methods. Some tactics for replenishing the ranks include offering lucrative contracts to prospective recruits and drafting thousands of inmates into the military. Furthermore, the use of foreign mercenaries has become more widespread. However, these stopgap measures can only do so much to compensate for the high mortality rates and the growing reluctance of the Russian public to participate in the war. The mobilization attempts continue, but the number of available and willing recruits is diminishing. Many conscripts are either too young, too old, or physically unable to face the rigors of combat. This has caused a noticeable decrease in the overall effectiveness of the Russian military operations. The high casualty rates and the ongoing manpower crisis reflect a fundamental issue in Russia's strategy. It is clear that without a significant change in tactics or a breakthrough on the battlefield, the Russian military will continue to face mounting challenges in sustaining its war effort in Ukraine. Hardware losses. It wasn't supposed to be like this. When Russian President Vladimir Putin launched this invasion, it was meant to be a swift and decisive campaign. However, as the battle has progressed beyond the 2-year mark, the initial strategy has devolved into a protracted war of attrition, exposing fundamental flaws in Russia's military infrastructure. Russia, with one of the world's largest tank fleets, appeared well equipped on paper to sustain a long-term campaign. With nearly 14,000 tanks in its arsenal, including hundreds that were combat-ready, it appeared to be prepared for long-term operations. However, the facts on the ground paint a different narrative. Since the assault began, Russia has lost almost 3,000 tanks, which is equal to its entire pre-war active stock. Despite generating 500 to 600 new tanks annually, it fails to keep up with losses, losing 1,500 tanks each year. This mismatch requires Moscow to rely more on antiquated versions, some of which date back to World War II and are unsuitable for current Ukrainian anti-tank systems, such as the Javelin. This reliance on obsolete technology goes beyond tanks. Russia's armored fighting vehicle losses have surpassed 8,800, with over 3,000 vehicles destroyed in only the last year. Russia aims to equal attrition rates by producing 4,500 armored vehicles per year, the majority of which are restored Soviet-era types. However, as the fight intensifies, the pressure on its aging stockpile becomes evident. The majority of vehicles deployed are renovated relics that are more vulnerable to Ukrainian defenses, exacerbating Russia's logistical difficulties. The consequences of these equipment shortages are significant. According to reports, Russian troops are using unusual tactics, including deploying unarmored Desert Cross 1003 vehicles, which are little more than heavy-duty golf carts, as frontline transport. While these vehicles serve logistical functions behind the front lines, their use in active combat highlights Russia's severe supply shortages. These weak vehicles have become ideal targets for Ukrainian drone strikes, resulting in increased casualties and logistical stresses. Despite these losses, Russia struggles to replenish its ranks. Despite a vast potential military pool of 69.5 million, with millions approaching military age each year, recruiting efforts face increasing hurdles. According to reports, Russia suffered around 315,000 casualties in the first 2 years of the conflict, necessitating substantial replacements. However, recruitment drives face opposition, with claims of rising desertions and morale problems among troops stationed in Ukraine. Organizations that assist deserting soldiers have seen a significant increase, showing growing unhappiness within Russia's military. International sanctions worsen Russia's logistical challenges. Western nations impose these restrictions to hinder Russia's ability to buy crucial military components and modernize its manufacturing infrastructure. While attempts to evade sanctions through other suppliers, such as China, appear realistic at first, rising international pressure limits Moscow's buying options. The resulting delays and poor quality of imports put additional burden on Russia's military capabilities, restricting its capacity to continue long-term operations. Looking ahead, Russia's military strategy remains uncertain. As losses rise and logistical obstacles worsen, the likelihood of continuing offensive momentum dwindles. The use of obsolete weaponry and strained manpower exposes Russia's military strategy in Ukraine's broader vulnerabilities. While it continues to change tactics and recruit replacements, the prolonged struggle strains its resilience and long-term viability. Sanctions. As a matter of fact, the imposition of strict Western sanctions, as well as the subsequent economic crisis, have significantly hampered Russia's ability to support its military activities. These sanctions were aimed at damaging important sectors of the Russian economy and have resulted in what analysts refer to as reverse industrialization, in which the ability to create and sustain military equipment is jeopardized due to shortages of crucial supplies and access to technology. The economic consequences of these penalties are significant. Russia, which has traditionally relied on oil and gas exports, is now facing significant revenue shortfalls, limiting its capacity to adequately support its military activities. The sanctions have targeted important industries such as banking, energy, and defense, aggravating the already difficult economic situation. This has resulted in a decrease in many Russians' living standards. Also recently, Russia's population has been declining, aggravated by health crises and societal difficulties. The declining population means fewer people of military age are eligible for conscription, posing a long-term danger to Russia's capacity to sustain its military might. This demographic drop is due to a variety of factors, including declining birth rates, emigration, and health concerns. In other words, Russia's health problem has not only led to a shrinking population, but has also harmed the overall health and fitness of prospective military recruits. Chronic health difficulties, including the high prevalence of cardiovascular disease and alcohol-related disorders, have further limited the number of individuals qualified for military service. These health concerns not only have an impact on current military capabilities, but they also constitute a future risk as the population's health deteriorates. In response to these problems, Russia has taken a variety of steps to strengthen its military forces. These include giving lucrative contracts to new recruits, enlisting prisoners in the military, and hiring foreign mercenaries to compensate for battlefield losses. Despite these efforts, the demographic and health crises persist, casting a shadow over Russia's long-term military strategy and its ability to sustain prolonged military engagements. Is there still hope for Russia in this war? Let us know your thoughts in the comments. Please like and subscribe to get more interesting videos.